Are we on?
Yep, you're on.
Great. Thank you for that intro.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to specifically acknowledge the nations whose land I'm on today, which is the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Coquitlam nations. Because BC is mostly unceded territory, there were never any treaties, and these nations didn't ever give up the land that we call home. And I'm so pleased to be here with Mieko. Thanks for agreeing to do this.
I was very honored to be asked. Thank you.
I thought I'd start off just by asking you a question about history, research, and kind of writing plays about real life, for lack of a better word. Because I know that several of your plays have historical settings or otherwise non-fictional settings, and I'm wondering what motivates your decision to try to stick to reality? How important that is that for you? And how do you make the decision to kind of diverge and go into fiction when you're writing the play in your own version of it?
That's a great question. And it's a line that I'm always treading on falling off on both sides, kind of finding my path through it, because I think every story is so different. I'm thinking back to my very first play, like The Red Priest, which was about Vivaldi and a woman who takes violin lessons against her will from Antonio Vivaldi. So there's almost nothing written about Vivaldi. So I had just, a few pages of actual factual information about him and one very slim volume that had pulled all the research together. So I was really left with so much freedom to create this person out of my imagination. So that was really great. So then my second play, The Blue Light, was about Leni Riefenstahl, who was the filmmaker who made Triumph of the Will and other propaganda films for Hitler and Joseph Goebbels. So that event is probably one of the most written about events, the Second World War and the rise of the Third Reich, in history. There is so much detail, books, movies. She wrote an autobiography that's almost 1,000 pages about her own life. The amount of detail was overwhelming. So I had to find a way to weave my interpretation of her life and story between facts and then imagine some of these moments. So yeah, they've kind of been all over the map. Right now I'm writing a play about my mom, my very own mom, and her decision to make a trip to Burning Man the year after my father passed away. So now I'm using her diaries and her stories that she's told me verbally and orally. My brother and other people have told me, and my own experience of that time after my father passed away, to try and tell the story. And my mom's very sweet. She said, "Oh, don't worry about it. If it doesn't work, just make something up." So I got some great permission from her to make something up. But I would say that about 95% of that play is true and 5% is made up. But I don't like to tell people which is which. So I like to see what they think is made up.
Okay, I definitely want to ask you more about what it's like to research your mom, but I think I'll come back to that a little later. Curious, when you were sorting through all this research on the Third Reich, how did you choose what to pay most attention to, or like where to start and where to continue?
When I came across the story of Leni's start as a dancer and then her transformation into a film director, and then sort of her being chosen by Hitler to document his activities and how she was used by Goebbels and allowed herself to be used by Goebbels to help build that propaganda around Hitler. I think I really just had to kind of go, what are the moments that most illuminate this journey that I'm interested in exploring? And I think the story that I was interested in exploring was, how as artists do we allow our work to be used? Or do we lose control of our work? Or how is that process happening, that sort of ethical decision making that happens along the way? And that was sort of the spine, I think, of my story. And so I was looking for those moments that illuminated that story. So that kind of gave me a bit of a filter to figure out what, out of all those millions of things that happened, were the moments to bring to the audience.
It sounds like that might actually have been a helpful thing artistically to be able to make that decision coming out of a play where you had a very little research to go on with the Vivaldi. Was that the case?
Yeah, it was like a really interesting, it was a completely different experience writing that play. But it was a really, I think a really good one. And I was proud of, I hope, the path that I was able to weave through that kind of slalom course of real moments. And there were a lot of moments that were just so incredible that were real. I was like, I really have to include these. So her meeting with Walt Disney and like a whole bunch of really intriguing things. So yeah, it was challenging, but it was a really great experience to do both.
Amazing. I'm curious if there's anything that kind of didn't make it into the final play that you found in your research that you would have wanted to include in maybe an alternate version of the play or a different play entirely. Because that's something I found in my own research, is that you find other plays you want to write and have to shove them aside.
Yeah, I have drawerfuls. I have drawerfuls of those moments. Oh my goodness, I don't even know if I could pull up a specific moment, but I certainly have tons that just have to, you have to kill your darlings, right? And for me, I don't like to imagine killing them. I just go, you're going to go in a drawer and you're going to get
I'm putting you in a coma. It's going to be a nice restful sleep.
Yeah, you're going to be like encased in carbonite, like Han Solo, and you'll just be held there for a while until you're needed, right?
Yeah, so, no one will criticize you.
Yeah, that's right. But I usually find that those moments sometimes come back in a different way, but in another project. So thinking about like a play like Lycée Bleu, which is sort of an adult noir crime fiction story that I set on Powell Street. There were things that were drawn from stories from my family. And then some of the things that didn't make it in ended up in my children's play about Powell Street. Great. So some of the like happier, lighter things that my grandmother told me ended up in the kids' play. So sometimes, what doesn't make it into the adult play makes it into the kids' play, or vice versa too.
Awesome. I said I would circle back. I'm curious about the process of researching your mom's experience. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things to say about that, but I'm wondering what was the most surprising part of that process for you?
Well, my mom is an amazing character, and I hope all of you who are listening to this or watching this get a chance to meet my mom one day, because she's incredibly endearing and creative, and she will love all of you because she's a very positive and warm person. I think her story is so extraordinary because in some ways she's such a regular mom, and this extraordinary adventure happened to her, and she was the person that brought it about. She decided to go on this pilgrimage to Burning Man for all these personal reasons after my dad died, to kind of find herself again and to prove to herself that she could do it. And it was something that my dad had mentioned once that he thought he might like to do. And I think what surprised me was how curious my mom was when she gave me her journals, which was an incredible gift to like have her share those like most intimate writing, especially in that year after my father had passed away really suddenly, to share that with me. But just to see her curiosity about life. And I feel like that's what drew her into this adventure. And I think that's what audiences seem to really relate to, is they love her curiosity and her willingness to just leap into something unknown. And it's really made me admire her a lot. And it's something that I hope to do. I hope to be pretty much as cool as my mom when I grow up. That's my goal.
That sounds great. Your mom sounds like the perfect protagonist for a play, because she's making a decision to go on this journey herself. That's, as soon as you said that, I thought, oh.
Yeah, I know, it's kind of fun.
It can be like that. That's great. And you're going to read for us from that piece now, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Would you like to say anything as a preface to that before you jump in?
I might just give you a tiny bit of background. So the play Burning Mom is a one-person show, and in it you meet a woman named Dorothy, who's a 63-year-old woman living in Calgary. And on stage, when you arrive to the theater, is a perfect replica of my mom's 26-foot long RV on stage. And there's just a woman standing there holding a Kleenex in her hand, and she starts to tell the story of this adventure that she's had. So the piece that I'm going to read from it is about a third of the way through, and it's a section where she's just about to leave on the trip, and she's enlisted her youngest son, Kevin, and his friend, Julia, who is a former model and someone who wants to go to Burning Man to have a really good time. She's got her angel wings, she's got her hula hoops, she's ready to go. My brother is involved in the electronic music scene, and so he wants to go down and meet a bunch of his friends who make speakers for electronic music festivals. We also meet her older son, Jason, who is there, and their neighbor, Mike. And Mike is a character who, a person who grew up with both my brothers. He lives 2 blocks away, and he's often at our house sitting on the couch watching Tremors or another movie in the background. So those are the cast of characters you'll meet, but it'll all be told by my mom. Here we go. It's 2 a.m. the night before we leave. I'm lying in bed, but I'm wide awake. And that's when I remember that Mieko gave me a journal for the trip. I dig it out of my bag. It says inspire on the cover. Oh, what the hell do people write in these things anyhow? The only journaling I've ever done was last year, and I don't want to think about that. I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't sleep at night, so I would just scribble and scribble and scribble on empty notepads to get the feelings out so I could fall asleep. And they're still hidden in the back of the closet. Those were dark, scary, horrible thoughts, terrifying feelings. Oh, but this journal is different. This one is meant for remembering, not forgetting. So finally I write, how to survive. Then I scratch out survive and I write a different word, thrive at Burning Man. Okay. Sip water constantly, number 1. I'm going to start with the practical, makes sense in the desert. Number 2, think like a 4-year-old. Okay, that's less obvious, but it seems important to enjoy Burning Man, right? Okay. Number 3, watch people. Well, it occurs to me that half the joy of the festival must be people watching, so that's good to remember. Number 4, talk to strangers. I begin to realize that some of the things I'm writing down are the things I told my kids not to do when they were little, but I guess back then I was trying to save them from danger, but now I'm looking for danger, for the outer edge. Okay, this is good. Let yourself go, Dorth. Okay, number 5, smile and acknowledge others whenever you run into them, even if they look scary. Okay, number 6, breathe. Number 7, look at the big sky like a blank canvas. Number 8, let go of your judgments about people. Number 9, expect goodness. I'm on a roll. These are really good. Okay, number 10, get better at bike riding. All right, I wrote that one down because I tried riding Dazzle, my new bike, around a cul-de-sac, and it hadn't gone very well. So continuing in that vein, but focusing on the positive. Number 11, if you fall off, get up and keep going. Number 12, laugh at yourself. I'm on fire. Number 13, dance like you're a beginner. Number 14, walk without a destination. Number 15, see what happens. Number 16, drop all labels you ever put on yourself. Number 17, trust your emotions. Number 18, soak up the exquisiteness of the stars at night. Number 19, look for beauty and kindness. Number 20, remember that life happens in small, special moments. That's what makes them precious. Notice them and cherish them because you'll never get those moments back. Oh, didn't see that coming. Well, that's it, I guess. Nothing to say. Nothing left to prepare. The road to Burning Man starts early. As we arrange, Kevin and Julia come to the house first thing in the morning so we can hit the road by 9. But by the time we unload all their stuff from their cars and I make everyone a good breakfast and we pack everything into the RV and the truck, it's lunchtime. But it's not my fault. I mean, unexpected things happen. Like Mike. When I come out with my final bag, there he is standing next to the RV with Jason, Kevin, and Julia. Oh, Mike, what are you doing here? Have you come to see us off? Kevin's having trouble with the hitch. He sent me a text, but I got a question for you. The tires on your truck, when was the last time you changed them? How the hell would I know that? That was always Eugene's domain. I have no idea, Mike. Well, Dorth, I don't want to tell you this, but they're completely bald. So after a huge debate, an extensive price checking on phones, on computers, and calls to stores, we decide to get new, cheaper tires once we get over the border and into the US. That way we won't lose too much time, we'll save money, and we'll be safe. And that's how by 9 p.m. in the pitch dark, with bald tires, we're finally ready to hit the road to Burning Man. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I now really, really want to meet your mom.
So those were all actual things that she wrote in her inspired journal that I did give her.
Wow.
For her trip. What a corny thing to do as a daughter, right? You give her a journal that says inspire. So.
Well, it was a very strategic move on your part because it turned out to be very useful for you now.
I had no idea that I was going to end up writing this play about it, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it sounds like a really nice gift too.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So next you're going to help me out reading a scene from my work in progress, which I think I should explain you have a connection to as well, because it's a play called The New Canadians. It's based also on real life, about a newspaper that was run by Japanese Canadians in the Powell Street neighborhood in Vancouver before and then went into during the Second World War years. And one of the characters is Ed Ouchi, who is your grandfather. So that was one of the ways that we've interacted in the past, as I talked to you about my research for the play, and now you're reading a piece of it. For the folks watching, I will add also the scene that we're about to read is in September 1939. If you don't know what happens in September 1939, you will very soon. And Mieko is going to read both her grandfather, who was the publisher of The New Canadian, and also she's going to read Tommy Shoyama, who was the editor at the time. And she's going to start off as Tommy. And I'm going to read the other characters who are in the scene, and they are all people who work on the newspaper with Tommy and Ed, and they're Kunio, Irene, and Eiko. And Justin's going to come in and be the voice of stage directions when we need them. Thanks, Justin. Also, the play is in the process of becoming a musical, so this particular scene will have a song in it. So we're going to skip those parts because I'm not prepared to do that.
Fair.
But that means there's a couple of times when the scene kind of jumps in time a little bit, but it should be pretty smooth. And also there's a little piece where a few of the lines are spoken over music, so the style is a bit different in terms of the dialogue. It's a bit more stylized. And also sometimes the characters will read out loud the things they're writing for the newspaper. Great. So I think that's everything. So much context. But I'll start off as Kunio, and then later on I'll be reading two other characters, Irene and Eiko. But it's the morning of September 3rd, 1939, and Kunio runs into the office. Is Ouchi here?
We were up late last night putting the paper to bed. Have a seat, Kunio. You look winded.
Have you been listening to the radio?
Yeah, I just got into the office myself. Why?
Germany invaded Poland today.
War in Europe, then?
Britain sent them an ultimatum. Withdraw by Sunday night, or yes, war.
And I suppose we wait to be called upon.
We can't wait. We've got to do something before there can be any doubt.
Ed enters.
Good morning. Cunio, you're here bright and early.
Germany's invaded Poland.
Bad news for everyone.
The JCCL's got to meet, tonight if possible.
I'll make some calls. Is the Nippon Club available?
Call me at the CJA office in half an hour.
Ed, do you suppose a lot of Nisei will serve if Canada joins the war, of course? Oh, Tommy, Britain will declare war and Canada will follow Britain just as the Nisei will follow Canada. It's our duty.
Irene enters.
What's our duty?
Ah, welcome, Miss Editor. How does it feel to have your first issue out in the world with your name in the masthead and our society page all assembled by you?
Not much different than how it felt at 2 o'clock last night. What's our duty?
To go serve Canada in the war. Germany's invaded Poland.
I'm making coffee, assuming neither of you boys has done.
Ed's setting up an emergency JCCL meeting. Will you come?
If there's not too much to be done at home. Mother was scandalized at the time I got in last night. What's there to talk about anyway? Has Britain declared war?
Not yet.
And Canada will make her own choice. It's not like you boys can sign up anytime soon.
But the time will come for you Canadian-born, like it did with the Issei during the Great War.
He picks up the phone.
Cunio, 8 o'clock tonight.
There's a song here. The next several lines are spoken over music.
And Ed reads an editorial. Throughout the past years of increasing tension in the international scene, we have all felt too keenly the inability or refusal of many of our fellow Canadians to distinguish clearly between the people of Japan and ourselves as Canadian citizens.
Friday, an invasion, an ultimatum issued.
Sunday, conditions expire. Britain and France declare war.
The telegram sent Sunday night to the Prime Minister of Canada.
In this hour of national need, the Japanese Citizens League unites with our fellow citizens in pledging our deepest loyalty and devotion to our country and the British Empire.
Song over. Iko enters, newspaper in hand.
Well, I'm glad I know my opinion on this war business now that the papers told it to me. There is no other opinion. We can't leave time for anyone to doubt. If Canada is taking an evening to decide whether or not to even join the war, we can take at least as long to decide what to say about it. I'd like to put the question to my readers and not just those already writing the editorials. A stack of letters for you today, Mr. Editor.
Japan is our fatherland and should be our priority.
Hogwash and hogwash. We're not even fighting with Japan. The conflict is in Europe.
But Japan, too, is a nation at war.
And they'll choose a side before long, but not today.
In the meantime, let's not take any chances.
You mean you won't print it?
It isn't signed. We'll print anything anonymous.
Canada is our priority.
Hand me that paper, will you? I have an editorial to write.
Oh, I suppose I'm covering the dance. And what a mess you all look, aside from Irene, of course. I'm the only one who went home last night. These boys were huddled around the radio when I left. See, they've got the same rumpled clothes on. The insurance salesman sat up all night drowsily listening to war dispatches.
Carry on, Aiko-chan. Lambaste my rumpled trousers. Tommy will have an editorial to match it. Once again, the continent of Europe is plunged into the mad catastrophe of war.
Reading over Irene's shoulder.
Really, Irene, this is trite even for Diana.
Iko tosses Irene's paper in the bin.
Iko.
She goes to retrieve her paper, finds another one instead.
Who put this letter in the bin?
Let me see. Not me. The telegram sent by the National Executive of the JCCL pledging the support and loyalty of the League was hasty and unnecessary.
That one, I threw it out. It's unpublishable.
It's signed.
It has some good points.
We are British subjects in name only. We should demand our lawful rights before enlisting our support to a country that treats us so shabbily. Aha, Tommy, you know that can't be the way.
And why not?
Canada will swat this argument like a fly, but to be their comrade who hands them ammunition, they'll remember when the conflict is over.
And when will that be?
Months, years, maybe decades. We will prevail if we keep our honor as our foremost policy. We did say our motto would be sanity and constructiveness, even in insane and destructive times.
Sounds like a war to me.
We cannot let war destroy our beliefs.
We cannot let the worst come without fortification against it.
I say we publish this letter. As a letter, I'll write my own editorial. In these grave and troubled times, each of us must call upon every resource at our command for guidance. The Nisei have not been accepted as free and equal citizens in the land of their birth. Why should they be called upon for service at a time such as the present? We cannot forget that history has made us citizens of Canada and that our destiny lies in the fulfillment of that role.
Thanks for helping me with that.
No problem.
I kept getting distracted because it's like a pretty serious scene, but when you were reading, I just was enjoying it so much that I started to smile.
Oh, that's great. It was fun. I got to read my grandpa.
Yeah, how was that for you?
Great. And I knew Tommy as well. So
yeah, that's wonderful. I never met Tommy, but one thing I noticed when I talked about him to you and to everyone else I've talked to who knew him is that when his name comes up, people they light up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful person. Yeah.
Very special person. So it's really interesting for me to use that as a guide when writing him. Like, what kind of person gets that reaction from people?
I know. And pictures of them at that time, they're all such young, fresh-faced, dapper young people.
Oh, yeah.
They're so
baby face.
I know. And they're full of so much hope and they don't know what's coming. And I was always so struck by that when I saw my grandpa's pictures too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We talked a little bit about this, how there's like the sense that you always need to write about internment when you're writing about Japanese Canadian experience, which in my play comes up probably about 3/4 of the way through, because I really love the pre-war community that they had before that on Powell Street when they're just like going to dances and stuff. And I know you also wrote your play, your Japanese Canadian play, Nisei Blue, is also focusing more on that time period.
Yeah, I think early on when I was, when I first got out of theater school, I started making films. I was in a film that Ann Wheeler made about the Japanese internment called The War Between Us. It was on the CBC. And then I made 2 films about internment. And so when it came to writing Nisei Blue, I was so interested, just as you say, to write about the pre-war time, because there's almost nothing done about that time. And Japantown, you know, the idea of a Japantown has really fallen away from our knowledge. We go to every city and we all go, oh, let's go to Chinatown. And that's seen as this wonderful place to go and visit. And it makes you realize that there were Japantowns up and down the West Coast that were all destroyed by internment and by racism during World War II. So I was so interested in trying to write about that vibrant community before it was destroyed.
Yeah. Was the research for that play, did it feel different to be researching something that was part of your family's history compared to researching the rise of the Third Reich, which I'm assuming not so much, but maybe I'm wrong about that too.
Yeah, there isn't too much written about that those pre-war years. My family, both my great-grandparents both sets were business partners, and they owned a boarding house on Powell Street, which is still there near Oppenheimer Park. And so the children of the 2 business partners married. So those were my grandparents. And so there is this physical building that we lost. It was sold off by the government during the war. But it's a sort of symbol of what we lost. It's a very tangible place I can go and visit that symbolizes what we lost during the war. So it's really set on those streets. And there's lots of descriptions that my grandparents made about what it was like. And then I invented, you know, this Japanese Canadian run supper club set in that time that doesn't exist. It's only in my imagination, called The Orchid. So it's a noir detective story with two white cops who Japantown is part of their beat, and how they get caught up in this story in the Japanese Canadian community.
So was most of your research actually from your grandparents and things that they told you or wrote down?
There were bits of that for sure. And also when I was down in San Francisco with one of my films, I went and visited the Japanese American museum down there. And I bought a book called Swinging in Wartime, which is all about Japanese American swing musicians and singers. And I made a film called Samurai Swing featuring Tim Tamashiro, which is about a Japanese Canadian man's love of swing music. And I have a love of swing music. So I picked up this book just out of personal interest. And in it, a lot of the artists talked about how they had this sort of trap line, as they called it, of like supper clubs that they would play up the West Coast that went all the way up to Vancouver. And a few of them mentioned Vancouver, and they never said what club they went to. So I thought, well, I'm going to invent the club that they went to.
That's awesome.
It's kind of like the Cotton Club. So all the performers, like, it's owned by Japanese Canadians in my story, and the performers are all Asian, but the audiences are primarily white. And for them, it's this exotic way to experience, in those days, what they called Oriental culture. But to kind of go and like have this sort of titillating look at an exotic culture that they didn't know very much about. And so really it's about those Japanese Canadians playing into those tropes and those stereotypes, but also having a completely separate world. Sorry?
While playing swing music?
They sing and perform swing music, yes.
So that's not that Oriental.
Yeah, it brought together a lot of my loves of music. I love crime fiction. And noir. I love noir.
Yeah,
and there's
really
something
fun.
very cynical about noir. You know, a lot of it came up after the Second World War and the First World War, but particularly after the Second World War. And so I feel like it matches sort of that feeling in the Japanese community of that devastation that they felt after the war too, kind of matches the emotional sense. Mm-hmm.
Well, there is, even though it's dark, there's often a kind of romance to noir too. And also, like, depending on who you talk to about the Powell Street neighborhood, some people did call it a slum at that time.
Yep.
Which is, the kind of the beautiful things that can happen in the possibly sketchy neighborhoods, depending on who you talk to. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally Skid Row, the literal Skid Row goes up through the center of what was Powell Street, which is now the downtown east side. So my story is set in 1938 and in 1985, just before Expo, when that whole area is being kind of gentrified. So another form of displacement that whole neighborhood has experienced and populations have experienced.
I mean, the SROs that are there right now that are housing low-income people were housing for seasonal workers for when Japanese Canadians were working in logging camps and things like that. So it's not a coincidence at all, that continuity.
And the boarding house that my great-grandparents owned now houses people who are addicted to opioids and other things. So
You reminded me of one of my own offcuts from my research that I really, really wanted to include in some way. Actually, just more swing music in the play, just in any way I can. Hopefully, maybe it'll make its way back in since now we're adding music, but also just the harmonica bands.
Oh, so great.
There's this beautiful picture of the guys in their suits, the Japanese Canadian guys, and they're all like playing harmonicas because they were such a trendy instrument of the time.
I love it.
But even in the newspaper, there's so many references to just like what was on the top 10 that week on the radio. And actually, I really want to tell you this. There was a column that was later on in kind of around 43, 44. Frank Moritsugu wrote a column about life in Kaslo when they were interned.
Yeah.
And all of the new Canadian men were living in like a bachelor house together. And he talks about being woken up by the boss, which would have been Tommy, with a Gene Krupa solo on his chest. Which is how that I learned that Gene Krupa was a really famous drummer at the time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I know. There's such a passion about music. And,
Yeah.
you know, even in spite of being interned, all those, they were still young people just trying to live their lives. And they were as passionate about music and all the things that, you know, young people are still passionate about. They were just inside of an internment camp. So
Absolutely.
it's wonderful to try and capture those little moments, especially I think before the war. We got to see them unfettered and unencumbered, just being who they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite part too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that you made a couple of films about internment right after you came out of theater school. And I'm wondering if that kind of work, has it shaped your other work that's in ways that are not directly related to internment? Does it change how you approach other things like the rise of Nazi Germany?
Absolutely. I think understanding a little bit how film is constructed. And I actually started editing old school, cutting film apart, you know, and taping it back together at the National Film Board, shooting my films on actual film stock. That's how old I am.
That's how you learn.
That's how you learn. It's how you learn actually how editing works before you hit digital editing or
yeah. When I joined my high school newspaper, we were still physically cutting the columns into place for the first year, and then we
learn how that.
But it does. It helps your brain figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So I think, I think knowing how media is constructed and branding is constructed. I'm also, you know, my dad became he was a painter and a printmaker, and he became a graphic designer. I'm married to a graphic designer. So, you know, I've been a part of commercial art and commercial like filmmaking and those kinds of things. As you know, my husband is editing commercials and things right now. I see how those moments are constructed. And so I was really, I think, interested, especially in the blue light, and kind of exploring that. And also thinking about how images of Japanese Canadians were constructed through the propaganda film. So when I made my first documentary about my family, Shepherd's Pie and Sushi, really there was almost no films in the National Film Board archive other than propaganda films that were made by non-Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. So my film was one of the first like few films that were made, and I was part of a little movement of people making identity films about the Japanese Canadian community who were trying to tell stories that were, you know, told by the community for the community. And that was just such a powerful experience. And I think that's when I really realized the power of storytelling, and that even though I was learning how to be a filmmaker, I was learning how to write, that what I did have was these passion to tell these stories from my community, and to tell the stories of all kinds of different communities that I just wanted to bring forward. Contemporary stories. So they might be about history, but they were always with a contemporary lens to say this historical, you know, this history or this story from the past is important to talk about now because there's a lesson, there's something there that I think we should think about, we should talk about, that we should illuminate. So I think my look to the past has always been to bring hopefully knowledge to the present. Yeah.
Amazing. On that note, can you tell us about your kids' Japanese Canadian play?
Yeah, the complete opposite end of a film noir crime fiction story is a play called The Tofu Wars. And that came from a story that my grandmother told me about how she and her friends ran illegal tofu in 1939, right after Japan invaded Manchuria. And what happened in Canada is that the Chinese community said, we're not going to have anything to do with the Japanese community. They invaded us, even though the people in Canada had nothing to do with that. So the kids at school weren't allowed to speak. The Chinese kids weren't allowed to speak the Japanese kids. They all went to school together. And my grandma said that her and her friend hatched a plan because the best tofu at that time, her mother felt, was made by a Chinese man. And so she would buy her tofu in Chinatown, Japantown, and she was devastated that she couldn't get this tofu. So my grandmother and her Chinese friend hatched a plan where he would go and buy it in Chinatown, and then she would pay him, and she would bring this tofu back from Chinatown and say, oh, it's from Japantown, but everyone knew it wasn't. It was Chinese tofu. So it's sort of about the kids despite the hatred, or the not the hatred, but the sort of those negative thoughts that the adults had about each other, they found a way around it because they were still friends, and they wanted to stay friends. And it's sort of about the kids unlearning the hatred that their parents are trying to teach them. And it's for elementary school. And
anything for tofu.
Yeah, and it contains a lot of really mouth-watering descriptions of tofu. And a little boy and his mom came up to me after reading of it, and she said, "My son is now obsessed. He wants to try tofu." And I thought, I hope he's not disappointed, because it might not be.
I mean, there are worse
as delicious
things
to a non-Japanese palate as I find it, but I was like, you go forth and try tofu, my friend.
I mean, that was one of the only things I would eat when I was a little kid. Like, I really couldn't handle strong flavors. So it was like rice and tofu and like cold potatoes when I was very small.
I love it.
I don't know. I think kids could really like tofu
like
if
Jell-O,
they've been primed to enjoy it.
Yeah. And there's this great scene where they watch, the man that makes the tofu, who's like the amazing tofu man, scoop it out of this barrel of cold water with a scoop, and he puts it into this little bucket, and she carries it home. And I remember being a child, in Calgary, growing up in Calgary, before they sold tofu at Safeway. You could not buy it at Safeway when I was a child. We had to go to Chinatown, and they would scoop it out of a big plastic barrel, and they would put it in a baggie and tie it with a twist tie, and you take home your little bag of tofu. And so I was kind of drawing on those, even my own memories of what it was like as a child to see this food, and to buy it in the cultural community, and the sort of the love that we have for our tofu. So
it's such a great memory. Yeah. That actually reminds me of I unfortunately don't have a personal experience that's comparable to that, but I remember seeing a picture in the New Canadian of when they had to make their own soy sauce. Show you? Right. Because a few years after the Manchuria incident, Canada stopped importing things from Japan, so they stopped importing shoyu, and they had to figure out how to make their shoyu because it was all imported from Japan. And they had this big picture of it in the New Canadian, which has very few photos. So it was like, pretty rare, but it was like probably a half-page photo of like the big vat. They're like, it's coming in 8 months, it will be fermented.
There's like 3 things that all Japanese care about: rice, shoyu, and tofu.
Yeah, and shoyu is one of the very few Japanese words that has an English equivalent that I think most Japanese Canadians still know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, there's questions coming up. I'll start reading out. We have a question from Pamela, who asks, what advice would you both give to get newbie playwrights started in writing a 15 to 30-minute play? Full disclosure, I teach teens in creative writing and playwriting, and I'm collecting advice. Ooh.
Well, what about for you, Carolyn? Do you have any thoughts?
I was going to let you go first.
I want to throw it to you.
I would say, it's a good question. I think I would say it's very different from writing like a short story, that you have to really focus on what you can accomplish by giving actors dialogue. And it's also a form where you have to be really economical, because if you write a whole paragraph and you could have said the same thing in one sentence, that's a lot of work you're giving for an actor, and a lot of time that an audience is sitting through an actor talking that they don't want to sit through. So yeah, like dialogue, and focus on dialogue, and be economical would be maybe a couple things I would say.
Great. I love that. That's a great question, Pamela. One of the things that I do with my beginning playwriting students is I use a lot of photographs. So I have people bring in photographs that inspire them, or I assign photographs, or I bring in a mixture of photographs and they choose one. And we kind of do a character study around that person. So some of it is factual, like what are they wearing? How tall are they in the picture? Can you guess? Or how old are they? And then some of it is really speculative, like what is their greatest hope? What is their deepest fear? And of course, we don't know that. We don't know who this person is. It's a stranger. But it kind of gets their imaginations going. And then I have them pitch some potential storylines that could include this character that they've invented. So I find like using characters as a way in has been really fun, and photographs kind of seem to get our imaginations going. I know a lot of my projects have started from photographs. It sounds like you were also influenced by photographs, Carolyn, just describing some of the pictures that like stood out to you from the New Canadian in your research. And
yeah, well, I'd have to say more the editorials and the text,
yeah,
because well, there's a lot more writing than photographs in the New Canadian.
right.
But
Yeah,
just because like the prose sometimes is just so full of passion that you can't help but imagine someone excitedly reciting it on stage.
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think monologues are also a great way to sort of let people start to write in a character's voice, even if they don't end up in the final project. I think starting with a monologue is really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cameron asks, what does your writing process look like?
Wow, mine's different on every project. I don't know about you, Carolyn, but every project kind of has its own natural needs and desires. Like a different child. You've given birth to a different child, and even though you think you know how they're going to be there, they are their own person, and you can't really force them to be what they're not. So some plays I've written like alone in a room. Other plays I've written on my feet with artists in a space. I wrote a play about stage combat called I'm For You. And a lot of it I wrote at Banff with 2 actors, and we were all throwing each other around, practicing all the things we learned at theater school about how to do a punch and a hair pull and a slap, and we would just throw each other around the theater. Then I'd run off and start typing. So I think every play is kind of different for me, and I've kind of stopped worrying about that too much. I've just sort of gone with the flow. I think going out to the Banff Center, I've had a chance to go to the Playwrights lab several times. And what was really interesting about that was seeing that every writer had a different process. So that kind of freed me up from thinking that there was only one way to write, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really comforting for me to hear, because I feel like every time I start a new play, I feel like I'm teaching myself how to do it again in a totally different way. And I'm like, haven't I done this before? Because I've been writing plays since high school, but it does every time feels so different. And I'm like, now I have to figure out how to write in this totally different way that this certain story is demanding.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. Okay, another question. When writing stories in the historical past, how does your research inform the kind of language you use, word choice, the diction of characters, and how do you keep the flavor of the era depicted in your story alive for the ear of a contemporary audience? Ooh, good question.
Yeah, I think about a lot about language and word choice. I'm so fascinated, maybe because my training was as an actor, but that is such a critical source of clues for the actor about who the person is. So I'm really particular about language. And I think you can see it in my plays, like from the play about Vivaldi, set in France in the 1700s, and then writing characters in Germany in the, 20s to 40s, characters in Vancouver in the 30s, present day. So I spend a lot of time on language. I create, like for You Say Blue, I was creating all kinds of I did a lot of research about what were turns of phrases or things that people said, looking back through papers and all kinds of things just to find all those little turns of phrases that people used.
Oh yeah, I love the turns of phrases. So one of my favorite ones is they always used to say orchids. Did you come across this in your research? When they say orchids to when someone did something good or impressive, they'd say orchids to this person.
Yeah, it's kudos.
So yeah, orchids to you. I thought that was so lovely.
All those little things are kind of lovely. And I think we just, as audience members, I just revel in people that are able to do that too. So I try to just sprinkle those in and find those little fun, idiosyncratic ways that people speak to each other. Yeah.
Awesome. Another question is, where did you two go to theater school?
Great question. Yeah. How about you, Carolyn?
I did not go to theater school. I did go to UBC, and I did have some interactions with the theater department, but I was more of an extracurricular theater practitioner.
Yeah, I think that's great, because you don't always have to go to theater school to become a professional theater artist. There's so many paths. I have so many friends that have had completely unique and divergent paths of how they got here. I started off in genetics.
Just like Irene Uchida.
Yes, my first year I bred fruit flies at U of A. And all my fine arts options were drama classes. And finally my teachers were like, yeah, no, come to the dark side, come to the drama department. And so by second year of university, I was doing a BA honors in drama. And then that year I auditioned for the BFA acting program, which is a classical acting program at U of A. And I got in that next year. So then I did 3 more years of a BFA in acting. Yeah. And since then I've done a bit more training, like at the Dance Center through an advanced acting program. And they have a program for women film directors. And I also did some training at the National Screen Institute in Winnipeg around screenwriting and producing and directing.
Awesome.
Yeah, so there's lots of places to get training.
Oh yeah, and I did take a lot of classes in like the theater department at UBC and creative writing and things. So I feel like I got the most out of being an English major, and also just reading plays as literature was really what I wanted to focus on, and reading other kinds of literature too.
That's wonderful.
So
yeah,
it's great to have that opportunity to kind of go across different things. And
yeah, I took some poetry classes with Douglas Barber at U of A too when I was doing my first 2 years. So I wrote poetry as well. I loved it. It was so great to go from one of those huge, like first year psych courses that have like 450 people to go to my poetry creative writing class. There were 7 of us in a room with our professor.
That's amazing.
So wonderful. So I loved those experiences. So, yeah.
I think that might be the last question, and it is 6 o'clock. So I'm wondering if we should wrap things up. Is Justin's voice going to return?
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Great. Yeah, I think those were all the questions.
Thank you everyone for your questions. Those were great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both, Mieko and Carolyn. So I guess to wrap things up, I will just have some quick one-word questions for you. The first one is, or this one isn't a one-word one. Is there anything that you're currently working on that you'd like to pitch and let the audience know that you're working on it?
Well, it's COVID times, so a lot of my plans went out the window, but I did manage to direct a play called A Brimful of Asha by Ravi and Asha Jain. I just finished directing that last month at the Citadel. So amazingly, I got to direct a play with real live actors and a real live audience. It wasn't online. Although you can watch it online, it's streaming, but I got to do it in a theater. And then my play Burning Mom was supposed to be premiering this year in Winnipeg at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre, but it's been postponed. So hopefully you will have a chance to see it in Winnipeg or in a city near you very soon.
That's great. It's going to be a good long while before we can have a full musical in a live theater, I think. So, but I'm actually going into workshop, COVID-friendly workshop format next year. So there isn't anything really to plug yet, but just be very, very patient as we work on that. It's in the works. It's in process.
Great. Okay. All right. And now the one-word answers. Favorite spot inside a theater, specific or general?
The crying room.
Their crying room?
Oh yeah,
a lot of
theaters have a crying room, which is a little booth at the back of the theater where if you have a crying baby, you can go and sit in there.
Oh, and that's a good feature.
Yeah, so we
should all have that.
I like to hide back there because I'm scared of seeing the audience at the opening because I don't know how they're going to react, and so I hide in there. And then sometimes my husband brings me wine.
That's amazing.
So I highly encourage you to explore the crying room.
I need to get into a theater that is big enough to have a crying room. I've never worked in a theater that big. Actually, that reminds me of one time I stage managed a play that I wrote, which I found was the perfect way to watch a play that I wrote because I had a task to focus on and I was removed from the audience. I was in the booth and I had to call cues.
Great.
So that was fun. I generally being in like a tiny theater that's close to the booth.
Yeah.
But now that I know that there are crying rooms, I need to find one.
So good.
Great. And then last one is current favorite play at the moment.
Just one?
Yep.
It's so weird because on one hand, I'm like, there's so many, how do I pick one? And on the other hand, I'm like, it's COVID time. It all feels very far away. There doesn't feel like there's necessarily a moment at this time.
Yeah. Think about that one. I had a chance to direct Concord Floral a few years ago, and that play is still really stuck with me. I love that play. It's a play about young people, but it really, working on it with a group of young people, I saw it touch young people, but also a lot of older people. And Jordan Canhill's a playwright I really enjoy, so that's a play that stuck with me recently.
Yeah, that play I would love to see because I've heard about it, and I have read Jordan Tannehill's Theater of the Unimpressed book, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
To see a long list. Okay, one relatively recent play that I really loved is The Shipment by Young Jin Lee. Where it's a Black cast but written by an Asian American playwright, and they kind of play off the expectations of what Black characters and Black actors should perform like. So I just love that they take control of those expectations. And there's a lot of like uncertainty about how things are supposed to come off that is like made the most of. I think it's really interesting, and I like anything that presents a new set of theatrical conventions and uses that to ask questions about what we're doing in a theater.
David Yee just wrote a beautiful play called Acts of Faith that featured Natasha Lumba that was done at Factory Theatre, and I got a chance to watch their live stream of that show. And again, like a wonderful Asian Canadian playwright writing for a Black character and a Black actor, and it was just a great show. So if you have a chance to get a hold of that script or check it out, I need to.
The one great thing about this time is that it's easier to get a hold of things like plays that are running in other cities, and sometimes even plays that aren't currently running because they've been recorded more likely. So maybe I can find that.
Amazing. And I think we have time for just one more question.
Great.
We have someone from the audience. Any advice on how to get a play workshop staged and published? Just your experience. Yeah.
I would say submit for everything. As a young playwright, I would always like submit for competitions, or if there was a festival going on and they were asking for submissions, I would often throw my hat into the ring. And I've learned to be brave about that. Sometimes you think, I don't know if I have a chance, but so many times something has come out of it, even if it wasn't that I was accepted into that particular event or festival. Someone on the reading committee would read the play and go, I really like that play, and they might recommend me for something else. So I always just think, be brave and throw your hat in the ring. Yeah.
Great.
I echo that advice because I'm still figuring out how to get all these things done myself, but I know that submitting things I don't think I've ever won one of those things, but it has made, no, that's a lie. I have gotten into some programs by submitting that have been great experiences, and recently I haven't won anything with my current script, but I've submitted it places and gotten to know people and made connections through that have not led to winning a prize, but lead to still helping the play grow in other ways.